We're trained as people who are, studied a lot. We know the technical issues. We know how to connect with people in terms of with the head.
Yeah.
But we don't do a very good job in telling stories, in finding ways to connect with the heart. And we know at the end of the day, what moves people, what moves opinions, what moves agendas is through the heart.
Hello, welcome to What the Earth, where we get to know NRDC's brilliant experts and hear about their solutions for tackling some of the biggest environmental problems of our time. I'm here with NRDC's President and CEO, Manish Bapna, to talk about the state of the environmental movement and the path forward during troubling times. Manish, thank you very much for being here with me today.
Delighted. Good to be here.
A lot of people are feeling overwhelmed right now. The sheer pace of the change that we're living through right now, politics, technology, the way we work, the way we connect with one another, it really feels unprecedented. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of a rapidly changing climate. Things feel like they're constantly heating up, both figuratively and literally. A lot of people I know in my life are talking about how they just feel overwhelmed with the sheer volume of things they need to pay attention to. It can be hard to know what to focus on and where to dedicate their energy to do good in the world. So how do you stay grounded during times like these?
No, it's a great question. And it has been a brutal few months. I've been doing this work for quite some time. It's been nearly 30 years. Working on poverty, working on sustainability. And one of the things that you see over a long time frame is it's never a linear progression towards moving towards our goals.
Yeah.
2 steps forward, 1 step back is par for the course.
Yeah.
And when you think of where we were 20 or 30 years ago, whether it's on issues of global poverty, whether it's on issues of climate change, we are in a profoundly different place today than we were back then. And so having that long-term perspective, so incredibly important. But the other piece of it, I have 2 kids, 18-year-old and 15-year-old, and a dog. And if there's one thing that kids and dogs have in common is they tell you to be present in the moment today, right? And so both being present today and thinking about what we can do in the moment we're in and having that long-term perspective, so incredibly important to staying grounded when the headwinds are as fierce as they are.
Yeah. I know my dog reminds me to remain present and how to stay rooted in my life every day, no matter what else is happening.
There is something very nourishing.
Yeah.
And in a world where we always are living in the past or living in the future, that is a good reminder.
Yeah. So I know that your parents emigrated from rural India, an area that has been experiencing extreme heat and water scarcity for quite some time. How did your roots influence your worldview?
My parents came to the U.S., shortly before I was born. And so, all our family was in India. So every summer we would be going back to India. My father grew up in a town called Udaipur, kind of a beautiful, beautiful city, surrounded by lakes around a desert. I mean, it was really exquisite. But there was an incredible amount of industrial activity, right? My father had 2 brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. And, growing up, my grandfather passed early, so they had to work at an early age. And a lot of the work that they did were in factories. And, the air wasn't good. And it did prematurely cut their lives. Yeah. They both passed earlier than they should for a number of reasons, but in no small part because their lungs were significantly weakened because of working in those factories.
Yeah. Do you think, did that inform you doing what you've done with your career?
Hugely. It became very clear to me at an early age that if you want to improve human welfare, you had to deal with the environment. The issues of poverty and inequality and issues of the environment, clean air, clean water, productive land, industrial pollution. Those things were inextricably linked.
Yeah.
And what was striking is that, coming back then to Chicago, where I grew up, like outside of Chicago and kind of middle-class America, it attuned me to looking at what was happening even in Chicago, even in America, in a much, much more kind of different way.
Yeah, tell me what it was like going back and forth between India and Chicago. I know that you were a kid, a teenager, I assume the 80s-ish. I would imagine everything is different, the landscape, the culture, the food. Paint us a little bit of a picture on what that was like and how it affected you.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you saying the 80s, though it started in the 70s. But my parents left, in the 60s. I remember when we'd go back to India, in my early childhood, we would stock up the suitcases with blue jeans and gym shoes and toaster ovens and things you couldn't find in India. I mean, it was a different world. I mean, it was a shock, right? You're in a place that people are everywhere. Poverty is everywhere. Everything is very visceral. Mm-hmm. And then I would come back to the suburbs of Chicago, back in the 80s when you think of Breakfast Club or Pretty in Pink, that was my high school, right? And it seemed quite divorced from the realities of what actually most people confronted. Mm-hmm. And it made me realize I was both quite privileged, but it also made me feel a little guilty. Like we were the only part of our family, our extended family, that had left India.
Yeah.
And were living in this quite privileged bubble. And that was a pretty big motivating factor for me to do the work that I do, because I felt, if not me, who? I had this privilege, this opportunity to live in a very secure, stable family, community, had educational opportunities that many people don't. I mean, I think the going back and forth between India and the United States, seeing the poverty, seeing the connection to sustainability, and recognizing that that wasn't just unique to India. A few years later, if you really look around, even growing up outside of Chicago in, middle-class neighborhoods. But if you look carefully, you see the inequality, you see, environmental harm, you see the same patterns outside of Chicago, and we see them all around the world. Yeah. And that was what really drew me towards thinking about human welfare, thinking about tackling poverty and inequality. It's what took me to the World Bank after graduate school. And pretty quickly after that, working at the intersection of poverty and inequality and the environment.
Yeah. And you mentioned the World Bank. I know that in your career, you've worked on both global poverty issues and obviously environmental issues. You've also worked kind of on two sides of the work. You've worked kind of within institutions, and you've also worked in the advocacy side and more the world of activists.
Yeah.
I've seen this play out in my life too, in former lifetime at Boston City Hall. I personally believe that you need both of those sides working together and treating each other like allies. I think that makes for a successful movement. But of course, that's a debate that goes on in our movement and all social movements, really. Can you say a little bit about your trajectory?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I after graduate school, was thinking a little bit about, okay, if I care about poverty and inequality, where does one go to kind of have impact on this? And so I ended up at the World Bank for the first 7, 8, 9 years of my career. Is kind of where I cut my teeth on a lot of these issues. The resources that the World Bank gave to developing countries to tackle poverty were pretty sizable. And so it was extraordinary being in my 20s and helping design projects that were hundreds of millions of dollars in these countries to tackle rural poverty. But it was also tough. Like, you're working within the system and you realize this idea of trickle-down economics, the Washington Consensus, this was very much baked into the World Bank. And also, the World Bank talked a little bit about inequality, talked a little bit about sustainability, but it was really much more about how to promote growth, not necessarily inclusive and sustainable growth. So about after 7 or 8 years, I had this, pretty kind of existential moment. Like, do I stay working within the system where I have this incredible access and reach, or do I try something different? And about 20, 22 years ago, made that big jump to the advocacy world. And I went to a small human rights organization. I took a 60% pay cut right after I got engaged. Not something I necessarily, well, it's a good test whether or not someone truly loves you. Went to a job that was, leading a small team of 20, 25 people. We didn't know where next year's revenue would come from. But I realized that being in a place where I can work to change the system rather than work within the system was in part what needed to happen if we were really going to tackle kind of the environmental crisis.
Yeah.
And so it was a big jump,
a
scary one, but I haven't looked back.
Yeah, that is a huge leap. What did Geeta, your wife, say?
She was, she had just finished her graduate work. She was coming to Washington. We decided we were going to live here, and her background is in reproductive health and working in the developing world. So, at one level, she entirely understood what I was doing, but it was a big jump. Yeah. Like neither of us having a real solid salary.
Yeah.
But we were at a point in our lives where we felt that was a risk worth taking.
Yeah.
She was deeply supportive, and here we are.
Yeah. Seems like you were aligned in your values in that way.
Absolutely.
In this moment of, major social, political, economic change and this kind of inflection point for the environmental movement, you've been saying that the environmental movement needs to evolve in order to rise to this moment. Can you say a little bit more about how you think it should evolve?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's important to remember when you think back in the 60s and 70s in the United States, that was an incredible time for civic action. When it kind of the birth of the modern environmental movement in the United States, we had, for the first Earth Day in April of 1970, 20 million people across the country in the street. Wow. 20 million, that was 10% of the country.
Yeah.
We had landmark environmental laws, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, right? Passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, right? Those were heady days. And I think we need to be asking ourselves, how can we begin to recreate some of the conditions that led to that type of power and that type of ability to move an agenda forward? And so I think as NRDC, as a key part of the environmental movement today, we need to be asking ourselves questions around power. How do we rebuild people power? How do we rebuild political power? How do we depoliticize our issues? They should not be partisan.
Yeah.
This is really about a better world for people, and a safer planet.
Yeah.
We need to think a little bit about how to communicate in this new information ecosystem. The world is different. It's not just about, can you get, cited in a New York Times article. It is now just a much more diverse, fragmented information ecosystem. There's quite a bit of misinformation.
Yeah.
How do we navigate that? So I think this is a good moment. It is an inflection moment for the environmental movement to think about some of these big questions, and how we tackle them is going to be critical to how we can continue to advance our agenda in the coming years.
How do you stay cool, calm, and collected when you're trying to convey these things?
Well, remember, I mean, the United States is much, much bigger than Washington, D.C., and the world is much bigger than the United States. We tend to be somewhat, following every news headline coming out of Washington, coming out of the White House. And I think it's important to look at what's actually happening on the ground. And when you look at what's happening in states, in cities, on the ground in terms of clean energy, in terms of clean water, in terms of protecting nature, it's a very different view. I want to be clear-eyed. The assault is brutal. It is hitting hard all around the country, but there are bright spots. Just this past weekend, California enacted a number of clean energy and climate laws that were groundbreaking. And that is not a unique episode. And it's also important to remember that the world is much bigger than the United States. The rest of the world is looking to the future. The investments being made in clean energy are huge. I mean, who would have thought that in 2024, over 90% of the investments made in the power sector were clean, right? The world is shifting faster than people realize. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, me too. It's easy to feel all, consumed by kind of the bad news that we hear coming out of DC and this overarching conversation. And it is heartening to think about, things moving forward elsewhere and the world moving forward in this way. I think a lot about young people growing up right now and, how much they're dealing with. Things are a lot more complicated, I think, for kids now than when I was a teenager. I think they're worrying about a lot more existential things. I think you said that you recently went to either your son's or your daughter's class to talk about what you do.
That is the most terrifying experience is going to speak. I do a lot of public speaking, but speaking in front of your kids' peers.
Oh, yeah.
There's no room for error. So I got this call from a counselor in my daughter's high school to go speak to her high school class about the climate crisis. And I said yes without asking her, which was mistake number one. And the day came, and I was in the school's gym in front of a couple hundred people talking about climate, and that is not an easy lift. They all have their phones out, so if you don't capture and keep their attention, they have a pretty good alternative. So one of the things that really struck me about the students were just how perceptive they were about the climate crisis. It's just a very different moment today in terms of the awareness about these issues and the sophistication in which they know about policy and politics related to climate. This was, back in 2021, 2022, before the climate law was passed. And I remember one of the students asking me, when you go and speak with, senior elected officials, why is it so tough to get this climate law that you say is so important passed? And I struggled with an answer because it seems so obvious why this is in the interest of the American people, why it would be in the interest of the country. And yet trying to explain a political system that doesn't actually reflect what people want, that is broken, that is corrupted by corporate money, is not an easy thing to explain to a high school class. But what really struck me was their desire to want to do something. So a number of people asked me, so what can we do? And there's a lot that can be done, within a school, within a community, within a county. And so we talked a lot about steps that even 15, 16, 17-year-olds can take. And I was struck by, after talking, I was worried that I was going to be alone there with no one coming up to ask any questions or for any follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
But I was pleasantly surprised that there was a handful of people that were clearly diehard committed to the environment, and they wanted to talk a little bit more about how to turn kind of some of the ideas we were talking about into action.
Yeah.
And the way in which I or NRDC can support them.
Yeah.
So that was deeply reassuring. And I remember that night when my daughter came home from high school, that was going to be the real litmus test about whether or not she was going to speak to me or ask why did I ever agree to do this. And she gave me this, like, you were fine, right? which at least coming from her at that point in time felt like a huge win.
I got to say, it's incredibly endearing. You're someone who has met with presidents, other heads of state. You go to the UN, and it sounds like the hardest audience you've faced is a gym full of teenagers.
That was the time that I felt most anxious.
Yeah.
Right. With hugely influential people, you can kind of talk shop and be yourself. But this was a group that that required you to be creative and to speak as much to the heart as to the head. Yeah. And that actually is something we all need to do better. Mm-hmm. We're trained as people who are, studied a lot. We know the technical issues. We know how to kind of connect with people in terms of with the head. Yeah. But we don't do a very good job in telling stories, in finding ways to connect with the heart. And we know at the end of the day, what moves people, what moves opinions, what moves agendas is through the heart. Yeah. And so I would encourage all of us to spend more time, not with the experts, but with people, and to talk about our issues, because that's what it's going to take to genuinely build kind of the movement we need and the power we need to move forward. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And I have a huge amount of respect for Gen Z and younger. These kids have so much on their minds, and they take it so seriously, and they really care and are paying attention to what's going on. And they also stand to lose the most out of any of us. So, yeah. They do. And they're also, they're showing agency. Mm-hmm. They're taking, you look at, social media today, and some of the most innovative, kind of exciting ways to communicate about the climate crisis, about the environmental crisis, is actually coming from young people. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about just in the day-to-day, like you're here at NRDC, I've seen your calendar. It's unreal. It's nonstop. You're talking to lawmakers, you're talking to partners in the movement, and you're talking to the experts here at NRDC, scientists, lawyers. How do you, at the end of the day, what brings you joy? Not that you're not feeling joy here. No, I mean, there is, you can never overstate the joy there is in being in an organization, in a community that shares your values, right? That was one of the things I learned very early on in my career, is that for me, and I think for many people, finding a place, an organization that shares your values, being around people that are committed to the same mission, to the same goals, there is something incredibly nourishing and energizing about that. So I feel that for me is huge. And then joy comes from, family, dogs, just like just living in the moment. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it. But just coming back a little bit to the challenging moment we're in, it just reminds me of that Martin Luther King, one of his quotes that really sticks with me, is that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that is very true for many organizations, for many movements that are trying to make the world a better place. Yeah. I hear you on the joy that you feel working in this community and getting to do this kind of work, because it really is
a privilege. My family, a few generations ago were immigrants. I'm not the child of immigrants, but I'm the great-granddaughter of immigrants.
Yeah.
And that's still, even a few generations removed, my family emigrated from Ireland during the famine. And that sense of gratitude and also guilt has permeated the generations in my family and my community as well, and also created this awareness of, how lucky we are to be in the position we are, and also the responsibility we have to think about what's going on and to do what we can to do good.
And I think that is to some extent, the American people. I mean, I just think the work that we do, the American people are just there's so much empathy, right? And so part of what I think we are trying to do is trying to tap into that empathy. You go almost anywhere in this country and strangers will help you. And there's a recognition that there's this interdependence that we have with each other and with the planet. And that is so, that is the real, that's kind of reality. And then there's kind of the political discourse right now, which is all based on division, fragmentation, fear, a zero-sum game. And that is not what America is all about. I think what President Trump and this administration is doing is completely at odds with his campaign promise to meet people where they are, to talk about cost, to talk about affordability. All of the repeal of the climate law that was enacted a few years ago, the repeal of rules and standards that aim to protect people, to protect public health, to protect the planet, they're all going to drive up energy costs. They're going to make things less affordable. And they're going to make us much more energy insecure. And the reason is in no small part because of how corporate money infects the political system. Some of you will remember at Mar-a-Lago that kind of deal he made with the oil and gas CEOs, that if they gave him $1 billion for the campaign, he would more than repay the favor, right? And we're seeing that play out day after day. This does not make any sense for the American public. And I think it actually is not going to make any sense even for the energy industry in the long run. We know the future is electric and it is clean. Clinging on to technologies of yesterday is not what is going to make America self-reliant, economically strong in the future.
What makes you hopeful?
I remain deeply convinced that the world that we are trying to usher in more quickly, it's a better world, right? We are not in a world of trade-offs that we're trying to say, protect the environment, but it's going to cost you, right? It's a world that is, from kind of a jobs, innovation, cost standpoint, better. It's a world that in terms of people's health, safer. It is a world that is more secure, and we're able to actually tackle these existential crises that we face around climate, around biodiversity, around human health. And so the thing that I feel very hopeful about is that I know that the world that we are trying to bring to bear is a world that is in people's self-interest. And that gives me hope.
It gives me hope too, because, knowing how much you have on your plate and how hard everyone in this building is working all the time, that, we wouldn't be doing this work if there wasn't hope, and if we didn't believe we were going to win. Manish, thank you for sitting down with me. I loved this conversation, and I appreciate the time.
Absolutely, it's been fun, and we need to do this more often.
Yeah.